Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pakoshnik. Thank you so much for listening. And on the other end of the tin can and string, we have our analyst and co-host. He is an analyst. He is a writer for the Daily Norseman, along with other blogs on the internet. And I believe the term "useful human" was used to describe you last show. Please welcome Arif Hassan. Arif, how you doing?
I'm good. Yeah, James called me a useful human, and then he has promised, I doubt he'll follow through on the promise, to add that to the list of titles that go after my name. We will see next week.
Yep. Dusty is the one who called you the useful human last week. That was it. So we'll see if we can just keep having you be as useful as possible. That doesn't sound right. I don't know. Just something. I feel like if you add too many titles to your name, like it either will turn off listeners, like, oh, well, he's a useful human, we don't need to listen to him. Like there's too many things going on. His head's just getting too big there. But we also have a special guest. We are going to be breaking down the Arizona Cardinals. So we are bringing on a special guest. His name is Blake Murphy. He is a former scouting intern for the Arizona Rattlers and a draft Twitter enthusiast. He is also an excellent Twitter follow if you get a chance. Blake, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, guys. It's glad to be on. It's going to be a interesting night on a short week for sure.
There's a lot going on, and both teams are fairly banged up. So let's play a Thursday night game, folks. Let's just get this out of the way. Let's just get this as
Before we do the preview, I'm actually kind of curious about the Arizona Rattlers internship. I've talked to you just a brief bit about that before. But, I mean, what's it like working for a football team? I'm sure our listeners would be, pretty interested in hearing about that.
Well, yeah, it's crazy. Like, after coming out of a background where I didn't play football in high school, I was never actually, healthy enough and didn't have, they're like, you can't play with your glasses on. And I was kind of disappointed.
Yeah, you weren't healthy enough. Yeah, that must have
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what I like to blame, not my coverage skills. But anyway, the fact was kind of crazy where I applied for the job online, came in, and then just had a really fast learning procedure with kind of picking up in the middle of a season. The Rattlers are probably one of the top organizations in arena football, and a lot of people underestimate just how important arena football is as far as for NFL scouts, for guys who just passionate and love the game. It was kind of a crazy season where you had injuries, you had everything from scouting guys and the PIFL. There's a lot of projects you'll work on where you're trying to see who's available, who's cut. It's kind of a very, very flowing process because the NFL, whereas guys want to play in the NFL and it's there, you have to kind of hunt and dig a whole lot deeper in the arena league, just finding guys who are still open, still available, checking out veteran scouting combines. It's definitely one of the more interesting versions of scouting where you're kind of rating some guys who are just kind of working at Target during the offseason. They have a second job, and other guys are looking at them, and they just came out of college, teams passed on them, they started playing for a team, and you're realizing that this guy belongs in the NFL. It's very interesting. I really enjoyed my time there. The Rattlers did win their third straight Arena Bowl championship while I was there, so I would consider it
one of the
big
better
blessing.
teams. Okay.
Yeah, no, they have a huge passion for the players, for the game, and then also just for setting up the players and giving them as close to a pro experience as possible. Whereas a lot of teams I found out would send their guys to like a gym, give them a gym membership a lot of times just to kind of work out, where they built their own weight room and invested it. So it shows when you invest in your organization.
Seems like it's paying off.
Oh, yeah, no, you invest in your organization, guys want to play for you, you'll find like the best of the best, the cream of the crop. The year that they had the championship win, they had two of their top wide receivers went down, and so they reached out to, it was Jason Gathers from the 2000 Miami Hurricanes team, who hadn't played football in maybe 2 or 3 years, and then Chris Jackson, who he had good old Ryan, I believe it was Ryan Leaf throwing to him, unless I'm mistaken. They're like talking about early 2000s. This is a 38-year-old guy who comes in. They're like, "Hey, do you want a chance to win another ring?" He's like, "All right, sure." So he just comes in, and then the two guys came in with the prospect of winning a ring, and they ended up kind of going out, and that's how they won their championship, is with two 35-plus-year-old guys just kind of carrying a lot of the torch. So it's just kind of one thing when you set up stuff like that and have an organization, guys just want to play for you. So it taught me a whole lot about with football and how organizations, a lot of times where you wonder how good organizations stay good and why bad stay bad. And that really showed a lot of where you look for in a good organization.
So what you're saying is if you want to be a good organization, you just don't have everybody meet up at Planet Fitness on like a Thursday.
I think that's a good starting point, quite honestly.
Yeah, you
A
can
lot of
do
listeners
the.
may not know this, but Leon Mackey, who was on the Vikings, training camp roster, was in a conversation for a practice squad spot, was an Arizona Rattler, turned it on to the playoffs for them, and then also Anthony McLeod, who's also in training camp for the Vikings a little bit ago, was assigned to the Rattlers. I don't know if he's with the Rattlers right now, but there's some Vikings connections between the Rattlers and the NFL.
Yeah, Leon's a great story for us. We had it where we brought him in on just kind of a 2-a-day practice with the team. He said that he learned more from just being with us for the couple of days than he had learned through most of his college experience. That's because people hadn't really taken the time to teach him or how to use different pass rushing moves. And he ended up actually coming on strong when they brought him back after one of their studs went down. And he came on the playoffs. I'd work with him on snap counts every time before the game because that was his one fault that he had was he would jump off sides too early. In arena football, you can't do that. Because 2 penalties like that and you're out of the game. If you get one in the first half and one in the second half, they allow. So it's something where he came on and improved a lot. So it's kind of fun to see where you get a hands-on experience. And I definitely recommend anyone who's either working interested in scouting, is like looking at just maybe watching all the YouTube highlights and really wants to get a better embrace than just kind of tweeting out their hot takes. Try to find any kind of team, any experience, work for guys. You'll get to meet people. You'll get to make connections. And you'll get to learn so much more about the game than you thought you would just from kind of a more static position. So that was kind of my whole experience in a nutshell.
Any chance we could implement the offsides thing as a team? Like if Matt Khalil jumps twice offsides in a half, we can just bench him, just kind of like rub his nose in it or something. Like I feel like if we apply the rules of that, it could be a positive, or people could just run through them through the replacement. But so let's talk a game. We have a game on Thursday. We're actually doing a little bit of a crazy setup here. We're gonna be doing we're putting this out before the game, and then we're planning on doing a recording immediately afterwards with Dusty and Arif. So there's a lot of Norse code happening this week. So look out for that. Let's talk about the game. I want to first bring up the Vikings offense versus the Cardinals defense. And I want to ask the question, how does AP and our patchwork O-line match up against the Cardinals' rush?
Well, the Cardinals have been one of the top rush defenses all year. Throughout the first 3 quarters, I believe they held Todd Gurley and the Rams just total rushing defense to about 6 yards. And this is like the team where you're realizing that they got Nick Foles at quarterback and basically nothing else besides Tavon. So they're keying in on Gurley, but also the fact is that with Todd Gurley, he's always going to break free. He'll always get loose. They still were able to hold him down for most of it, and they've always had a huge focus on the rush defense at the last 3 years under the Kaiman Arians regime. That's kind of continued since they've built around the front 7. So that's kind of the biggest one with the AP is you can only kind of hold him back a lot of times for so long, but I think the number of touches is going to be a big determining factor as far as if he's going to be able to kind of break one loose or if the Cardinals will be able to shut him down a lot.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a little bit about that, and it kind of relates to the other aspect of the defense. The Cardinals are not really known, for all of the excellence that they have, around their defense. They're not really known for having, a phenomenal pass rush. And I know that they've changed sort of the philosophies that they have, especially with the front 3 along the defensive line, in terms of, what those defensive linemen are asked to do. So do you think a lot of the restrictions that they have in the pass rush may be related to maybe a lot of the instructions that they give these talented defensive linemen, ask them to stop the run first, 2-gap, that sort of thing?
Oh, definitely. The biggest thing that they've changed around with their defense is they're not a 3-4 scheme anymore as far as for giving specific positions. Calais Campbell had been a 3-4 defensive end for years and years. This year they actually officially changed his tag over where he's now considered a defensive tackle. So what they basically have done is they've kind of created almost like a plug-and-play gapping system where as long as guys are able to maintain and hold their gaps, they've had guys like undrafted free agent Josh Morrow. He plugged right in. They had Ed Stinson, a 5th-round pick, took over from Corey Redding, who's one of their bigger free agent acquisitions, and he went down. Defense didn't miss a beat. He had a couple tackles for loss on Todd Gurley. Part of it is with good scouting, but also part of it is they have a very fluid and adaptable scheme. And the guy who kind of makes that all happen and makes it flow is Patrick Peterson and Dale Buchanan. What Buchanan does is he gives them a flexibility where he can play that used to be kind of the wide Darrell Washington role where he'd play the linebacker or make plays in the run game, but also then he can switch into being a safety and can either cover tight ends, he can blitz. It's kind of like a chess piece. They can move around the board wherever they want. And then Patrick Peterson's been playing out of his mind this year. Last year he got a lot of bad flack, and part of it was he had a weight gain from diabetes in the offseason where he dropped 20 pounds this year, and he's just been extra motivated to get back to the top form that we'd seen from him that was kind of gave him the contract of being the highest paid corner in the NFL. And I think outside of him, Josh Norman, and then maybe Chris Harris are like the only other two cornerbacks I'd say are playing at a higher level. But he was going to be put straight on to Mike Wallace, which I guess that could be either considered a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how you're going to use Wallace in the game. But it's just going to be put on there, and kind of he locks down that side of the field. So when you put those two things together, that's kind of where they have the run defense, and then they try to focus on the secondary. So even though they've got a terrible pass rush, and I say terrible as in they're probably going to finish bottom 5 in sacks, they're still finishing top 3 overall in defense. So that just shows you how talented and how deep the secondary is.
Yeah. In passing DVOA, they're defensively number 3 in rush DVOA or in run DVOA. They're number 5, so it certainly seems to be working out for them. You mentioned that it's kind of like, or you mentioned that they kind of formally switched to a 4-3, and then the gaps are sort of, you hold your gap instead of you shoot your gap. So that is kind of a lot like, 2011, 2012 Seahawks before they asked their defensive line to be a little bit more aggressive to the gaps. And then you also just mentioned that they have one of their safeties drop in and act as a linebacker, also kind of like the 2011 and 2012 Seahawks. Obviously, the offense is a lot different and a little bit better than those two iterations of the Seahawks teams, but it certainly seems like they're taking, some pieces of what they've learned from playing in the NFC West, and I think there's also maybe some strands of the old 49ers in there too, and applying it maybe in a different way for the Cardinals. Do you think that's a little bit accurate?
Oh, definitely. I think that's part of why when you looked at with Wisenhunt and just how terrible that regime ended, when Keim and Arians came in, they said that they wanted to try to compete against the teams in the NFC West. They built up the O-line and the D-line. They spent I think it's at least almost $100 million building up their offensive and defensive line. And that's been kind of the strength of the team, is that they want to try to be able to bully you around in the trenches. So between that and then the other thing is when you're saying Cam Chancellor, that was kind of like Dayon Buchanan. That's kind of some of their idea behind the pick was wanting that safety. But the last thing that they did is they're a very blitz-heavy team. They started under Todd Bowles, and he's a head coach, obviously, now, and he had beautifully timed blitzes. But when I would go back and watch the Vikings defense with Zimmer and then watch Bowles, I noticed there was a whole lot of times they would bring pressure with 5 guys. Sometimes they would even blitz 6, and that's kind of a very aggressive blitzing defense. So I think there's a lot of similarities between Vikings and Cardinals tendencies, at least from what I could see when I was watching some of the Vikings tape. The biggest one that I noticed was when the Vikings were playing the Chargers earlier this year. They took an A-gap blitz from that and then had a safety stunt around on a 6-man pressure just to get Rivers. And that's one of the James Betcher's specials, is he loves bringing those safeties, bringing 6 when the game is on the line, and they trust their talented secondary to hold up at the end. So that's kind of what the whole team is built around. If you can find a way to chip holes in their secondary, get the ball out quick, their pass rush isn't going to get to you. You have to kind of burn them on the blitz, since that's where they live or die.
Well, let's mention. Let's bring up Teddy Bridgewater for a moment. Teddy's been rushed and harassed more than any other quarterback statistically this year. Is Teddy going to get a chance to breathe out there, or are we looking at a repeat of the Seattle game where he's just going to get crushed?
I think that he's going to get a little more room to breathe out there. Arizona has not been good at bringing down the passer this year. They've caused a lot of pressures, a lot of hurries, but not very many sacks. Seattle's got one of the better pass rushes in the NFL. They got to Carson Palmer a lot when they played up earlier this year, where he was hitting the ground all the time. But Arizona has not been able to kind of finish a lot of the time, so they're able to get pressure, and they've basically relied on their secondary, where they either get pressure, force a bad throw, run it out, or they're able to kind of have a good coverage in the back and then eventually bring the guy down. But I think Teddy's going to get a bit more time just because this pass rush, they're basically relying on 35, 36-year-old Dwight Freeney, who basically had 2 sacks off of 2 spin moves, which has been kind of nice. And then Marcus
Dwight Freeney special.
That's basically Dwight Freeney in a nutshell, but you can only kind of do it. You can kind of do it once in a game. And then Marcus Golden, who's the second-round rookie, who I didn't actually like him as much during the first part of the draft, and I'll admit that I think I mostly was wrong on them. But so far, he's had the most pressures on the team, and he still hasn't been able to get into the backfield or cause sacks consistently. So I think Teddy's actually going to get a lot of time in this game. As far as for the question is going to be maybe as much time, so much as is the plays going to be there downfield, because Arizona's secondary, they've been able to blanket guys this season where they haven't been able to have open people. So that's kind of where it's been kind of a give or take, where you have to basically trust your receiver and be able to burn them just by finding mismatches in the defense. And that's how they've mostly been able to beat the Cardinals this year. The teams that did the best were the Browns forced turnovers, and then they'd use big tight ends against their smaller corners. That's one thing where Kyle Rudolph, he's going to be a huge factor for the Vikings offense, I think. That's kind of one of those matchup problems they're going to have to exploit in order to actually get an edge on Arizona, because they have a very talented defense.
Yeah, it's 3 games in a row. We've heard that. So I do have a question, and it's kind of borne out a little bit. So I do have a question then about sort of Arizona's corners. So you talk about how Teddy's going to have a little bit of time. He actually does have like a pretty enormous split, a split that didn't actually exist all that much last year in terms of when he's playing under pressure and when there's no pressure. So, if we're comfortable using Pro Football Focus data, passing under pressure, he has a passer rating of 60.1, 3 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, 6.1 yards per attempt, and a completion percentage just a tick below 50%. But when there's no pressure, a completion percentage of 76.5%, 7.5 yards to attempt, 5-to-3 ratio, passer rating of 99.0. And then there's a 12-point grade difference between plays under pressure and plays with no pressure. So this is not unusual for quarterbacks, obviously, but this is the kind of thing that Arizona has been pretty comfortable with, putting quarterbacks in a situation where they don't necessarily have to pass under pressure because of how comfortable they are with one of the people that you mentioned, Patrick Peterson, one of the person that we're going to talk about right now, Tyrann Mathieu. Because of how excellently they've been able to play, and not just been able to play in the first 2.5 seconds of a drop back, but going on to second 3, second 4, so that receivers don't continue to get open. Can you tell me a little bit about how Tyrann Mathieu figures into this, and then also what it's like to have corners who can defend for that much time, whether or not it makes you nervous, and how corners can get that used to things like the scramble drill?
Well, I think as far as for nervousness goes, you feel a lot of confidence in the team just because you'll see quarterbacks standing back there where they're having to kind of move around the pocket, they're getting pressure, but they have nowhere to throw the ball. Guys are getting covered. There's times where you'll basically have a lot of picks that'll be forced just because the quarterback will move off of his spot. There's even ones where they'll actually have the Kaepernick game where they played earlier where they won 47 to, I believe it was 47-3 or some ridiculous score. They actually had 3 throws that they baited Colin Kaepernick on because they knew if they pushed him back under pressure, he'd throw off of his back foot. And so the corners are smart enough from reading the film and seeing it that they're reacting quickly, they're making plays on the ball, and they're actually, I believe they're leading the league in turnovers, interceptions, at least right now I know as a team that they were. Rashad Johnson, who's one of their free safeties, has kind of been the biggest recipient where he's just kind of having to just play center field and is getting all the picks that are getting thrown his way. He's got 4 interceptions this season. So I think that between the corners, with having Tyrann Mathieu on there, with the way that he's playing right now, is you have the confidence where he can match up for if they wanted to put, say, Antonio Brown in the slot, you'd feel like he could handle him. If they put a 6'6" tight end on him, Matthew's actually, I know he's given up about despite all of the defensive player of the year awards, he's given up probably about 6 or 7 touchdowns. But he's also probably stopped about 6 or 7. And these are they're matching up 6'6" tight ends on him, and he's still being able to knock the ball down or cover them effectively. So he's just playing lights out this year where he's very, very motivated. He came off of a big the ACL injury from last year, wasn't really ever himself. This year he's got the confidence. So playing with him and then another guy like Patrick Peterson, it's kind of where you just have so much flexibility as far as where you got this side of the field covered. You can blitz Mathieu. He's made a lot of plays in the run game. He's at a team-leading 70 tackles. But this is a team that really what it does is it runs through their defensive line. They trust that their defensive line is going to shut out the run game and force you to be one-dimensional. And once you're one-dimensional, all they know is that they can just kind of send and blitz guys at you, and they trust their guys to hold up. So it's kind of a balance of where they don't really have so much of a pass rush, and that's partially because they don't really need it. They'll just dial a blitz up when they need it, et cetera, and they'll be able to kind of get it that way. So Matthew's been kind of one of the MVPs of the team this year, but even still, he's kind of profiting as well from just a really well-designed scheme that's using him to his best ability.
Well, so when I follow Cardinals Twitter during a Cardinals game, one thing that I do notice is that there's a lot of grief over Gerard Powers. Will the Vikings be able to target him as a weakness? What's the source of that grief? Are things maybe a little bit overblown in regards to him? What's the story surrounding him, and do the Vikings have the ability to exploit that matchup, do you think?
Well, I think they definitely will. For starters, Powers has actually already been ruled out for this week. He actually took on an injury over in the Bengals game. So the person who's been replacing him is newly paid corner Justin Bethel, who's a special teams ace.
Right.
Yeah, he's the new one who's taken over. And he ended up matching up with the Rams game where he was on Kenny Britt all game. I looked it up after the game. He got targeted 10 times in the game, only allowed 2 receptions with 1 big pass. He's just as athletic as Patrick Peterson is. He's just always been a lot slower as far as developing and kind of learning as a corner. But that's one area where, with Powers in, he's more of an inside slot corner. Last year, the Cardinals' defense was lights out. They were making up for very, very little good 3-4 linemen up front last year when they had Cromartie on the outside, because Powers and Matthew were both on the inside. So they basically had 4 corners because Powers is best fit is inside. So I think with Bethel, there's times where you can test him. I think Stephon Diggs might actually be able to get behind him at least a couple of times because I think Peterson's going to be matched up on Wallace, obviously. So I think that's an area where you could abuse him. The biggest thing is going to be you're going to have to get strong enough of a run game where they'll bite on play action, because that's where if they stop the run, then I think you're going to have them with good coverage. If they don't stop the run, that's going to be a problem.
Okay, and then we talked a little bit about the strong defensive line in terms of run defense. We've talked a little bit about the secondary in terms of pass defense, but I want to know a little bit about these linebackers, because Pro Football Focus isn't all that happy with them. I haven't heard that much from Cardinals Twitter about the linebackers. It's all been about the secondary. So are there, and you've also talked about how Kyle Rudolph might have a big game because of these matchups. Is there a concern you have about the linebackers? What are the kind of things that you can exploit with this linebacker core in particular? And what are the kinds of things that you worry about, and what are the kind of things that you're proud of with regards to these linebackers?
Well, yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head. If there's any kind of weakness that the Cardinals do have, it is at the linebackers. I know that they had over 180 yards were given up just either through screen passes to the running back, which that's kind of something where you look at AP with the passing game. That's something that's dangerous. Part of that's just because they've got an older linebacker outside who's playing part of the snaps with Dwight Freeney, and then you're looking at a slower, kind of more of a run stuffer, kind of run up the middle of the gut linebacker, and Kevin Minter. And Minter's played exceptionally well this year. He's been very much like a good player as far as for the run game. He's been shutting it down. They haven't really noticed much of a drop-off from Larry Foote leaving and becoming a coach from last year. That's still just kind of crazy. Like last year's 36 years old, like barely the gear, and he played like almost every snap last year. But he's just filled in, and he also lost weight to about 20 pounds. So sometimes when you're scouting guys and you have a guy written, like most Cardinals Twitter had already written him off as a bust, and he came in this year, lost 20 pounds, and he played through a pectoral injury last year. So sometimes it just takes guys another season or so to get healthy. But his big weakness is with guys off of a slant or running back is where he just doesn't have the speed to keep up with guys in cover. So that's been one of the bigger weaknesses as far as for covering screen passes. The Saints got over 100 yards over screens of big plays. The Bengals took advantage of it. So far, a lot of teams haven't targeted it as much, though. So that's something that'll be interesting to see if the Vikings come out with a screen-heavy game plan on third down when Arizona blitzes 5 or 6 guys and takes advantage of a lot of open space.
Is there anyone on your team that gained weight this offseason? Like, everybody so far has lost 20 pounds and is playing out of their minds.
Dan Buchanan put on a few more pounds. Like, the man is like a beast with working out. He went up from about 225 to around 235, and he might be playing at 240 right now. I think he's going to probably settle about 245, 250 since he's moving to full-time linebacker. The other player who's kind of come out of, I guess, nowhere has been J.J. Nelson. Was the fastest man at the combine this year.
Definitely needed to gain weight.
Yeah, he was about 155 or so when he weighed in at the combine, and the coaching staff thought that he could get up to about 170 and be able to keep the weight on and keep the speed. And he hasn't really gotten up that high. He's put up probably about at least maybe 10 pounds. So maybe you're looking at 165 on a good day after a Big Mac. But so far, it's been more keeping that speed.
I like that you have a real answer to that question and not just not just a dismissive laugh. Like, no, actually, there are a couple of people who have gained a little bit of weight, but
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's been one because that was the biggest knock on him. I thought he'd be only a kick returner and he wouldn't be good for much more because he'd get shattered.
Right.
He did have an injury early this season, but the way the Arian scheme works as far as for targeting big guys, he's basically just had to run by himself, run by guys, and Carson's been able to throw it over the top past safety. So it'll be something to watch, but that's kind of the way that his scheme works. It favors a lot of those smaller guys, why John Brown and JJ and some guys who can get knocked for maybe being only around 160, 170 can make it last in the NFL.
Sure. Well, so one thing that we briefly mentioned were an injury that you had, Gerard Powers at cornerback. Are there any other injuries on defense that we should pay attention to?
Let's see. Taking a look at some of the guys, a few of them were limited on the receiving report with some of their secondary, Tony Jefferson, Rashad Johnson. Usually for Arians, if they practice on like either the day before or the last day of practice, if they do practice, even if they're limited, they'll usually play. There was one game John Brown didn't, which angered quite a few fantasy owners. But Arians
he was active, wasn't he? I remember.
He was active. They were like, yeah, he's just a backup. But they were honestly playing the Browns, and I think they were like, we can beat the Browns without John Brown, which kind of says a lot about the state of their team. But and then they've had the Corey Redding, who's been a defensive tackle. They got him from the Colts, 14-year vet. He should be back. So that'll help since they've been missing probably their best overall pass rusher this year, Frosty Rucker. They've been rushing him from a 3 technique, and he's been able to get in the quarterback's face. He's one of the guys who hurt, but he's coming back this week. So between that overall, there's not a lot of injuries on the defensive side. It's more been on the offensive side. The defensive side still has been playing pretty well and has been healthy for the most part.
Is there anybody on the Cardinals defense where we can kind of look at as the canary in the coal mine? Like, if he's having a good day, this is going to be a long day for the Vikings.
It starts up front with the line of scrimmage. So the Cardinals, after they signed Jason Peters to a contract, and he ended up going down with an ACL injury. So they got 4th-round pick Rodney Gunter. Kind of came in after coming out of literally like nowhere, where they had like to drive 2 hours away from the airport to this small school. And he's been filled in and been a really solid one technique up front at the nose tackle. So he's been kind of one of the keys. He and Calais Campbell have been kind of the keys to a lot of the run defense. If he's getting whipped at the point of attack, that's something where then teams are able to kind of get maybe 5 yards on first down. That's there. He's been holding up really fine all year. He's been a huge piece of their success. So if he's having a good day, they're kind of shutting down Peterson up the middle. And then on the edges, as far as if they're able to kind of contain, with Marcus Golden's been having some problems with containing. He'll get too far upfield rushing the passer, so they're able to kind of hand off. But if he and Gunter, those are the 2 rookies that they're basically counting on for most of their defense. If they start having good games and everything, then it's really hard to kind of see. You have to take advantage of the rookie play and try to get away at least to be able to somehow run the football on them. Otherwise, there's no room for play action because Arizona is just going to be able to drop back and be able to keep their secondary and wait for the ball to come to them. Oh, the other player also, I was thinking of Justin Bethel. He'll probably start again for a second week. He plays well and is able to kind of handle the number 2 player. He'll be good. If he doesn't play well and gets burned deep a couple of times, there could be some big play potential there. But he was the player that when the game was on the line with Patrick Peterson out, they put him on A.J. Green on a 3rd down pass, and he ended up delivering there. So they're hoping he can step up and be that number 2 guy eventually.
Well, let's bring up the Cards offense versus the Vikings depleted defense. Formally, Barr and Joseph are listed as out as of this taping. Harrison Smith is not officially ruled out formally, but question to Arif: is it better to rest them now to be healthy for the last few, possibly more winnable games of the year, or should we really be pushing toward attempting to beat the Cardinals?
Well, yeah, I guess maybe it doesn't. You probably shouldn't say, quote unquote winnable games of the year because, in theory this game is winnable. But I agree that for sure their value, if you're going to choose between 2 games, I think their value will be maximized against the Bears or the Giants. So I agree with you in essence there for sure. And then I think that it's better to rest them. I think that you would be playing them injured regardless. And if you play a player injured, you're just more likely to see them get a long-term injury. The Vikings have experience with this last year. When Chad Greenway was playing, he was playing injured last year. He suffered a long-term injury. And, Zimmer mentioned that, he sort of realized that this is the kind of thing that happens when you play, an injured player, or maybe I shouldn't have played Chad or whatever. And I think that, this makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think injured players tend to just be more likely to be tentative or protect themselves, not because of their attitude, but just because of the way the human body reacts. And players who play tentatively are just much more likely to get injured. And then also, players, obviously, this part's obvious. Players who are injured are just more likely to aggravate those injuries. If you got a cracked rib, it's much more likely to put up less resistance to more cracking than an uncracked rib. Things like that. So I think that, even if it wasn't just, or even if it was, question of choosing one game or the other, you'd want to hesitate. But knowing that it's not just a question of one game or the other, I think you definitely want to rest probably all 3 of those players, because even though that's going to probably lead to a shellacking, who knows? I think Vikings fans are a little bit caught up in the moment. I think that it's still better to rest injured players because injuries can aggravate.
All right, my question to you, Blake, is which PED is Carson Palmer on, and where can we get some? He has looked really good, minus the 2 strip sacks in the Seattle game.
Yeah, no, he's basically been putting up like MVP numbers and having MVP season, which is even more impressive considering he came off of an ACL injury last year, just at about this time last year. So just for him to make that recovery has just been nothing short of remarkable. He's had full mastery and confidence of the offense, but the biggest reason also is mainly that there's been improvements in the offensive line, especially the interior's been a bit stronger, but also the fact that there's just too many weapons on this team. Once they ended up having a healthy season from Larry Fitzgerald, once he accepted his role fully, they basically finally were able to put together a strong running game behind Valdir and Iupati. So it's been kind of a mix of everything, but really when it's come down to is Palmer is just navigating whatever pressure he's getting well from the pocket and delivering very, very accurate strikes downfield. So it's been really impressive to see just because he's probably the most valuable player for sure for the Cardinals team, but also he's kind of right up there, with Cam Newton and with Tom Brady, obviously. And I think he's actually outplayed Brady to this point. If you use like some of the PFF numbers, they would a lot of times basically put Palmer ahead of Brady, mostly because Palmer would face a lot more pressure than Brady would, and he'd be able to deliver accurate strikes. So that's been what's the biggest one, is that even when teams have blitzed or when Palmer's been under pressure, he's still made very smart, quick decisions, and he's been able to kind of get rid of the football before he's been able to kind of take a whole lot of sacks, which is extra impressive.
Right. So I do have a question actually about this offensive line. So the Cardinals' offensive line was famously bad. It was like sort of the epitome of sort of what a bad offensive line is. Maybe 2, 3, possibly 4 years ago. And I don't want to say it's a huge turnaround because I wouldn't say they're necessarily sort of the best offensive line in the league or anything like that. But it's definitely a big turnaround for the offensive line where you could have some really good players like Valdir and some pretty I even want to say average performing players along this line. And what and I mean average as a compliment. I think most people mean it as an insult. I think in this case it's probably a good compliment because you want an average offensive line in a lot of respects. What I don't want to say what has it been like, but sort of what have the Cardinals done to sort of flip things around in terms of their offensive line? Has it just been, maybe you've lucked into it, maybe some players have developed, maybe some players are healthy, you made some good draft choices, maybe some free agency choices. Tell us like sort of what strategy the Cardinals took to get to this offensive line.
Well, part of it is, when you look at your starting base, you're right. You had D'Anthony Batiste, who is not in the league, obviously, was like the worst tackle in the league. And on the other side, Bobby Massey, when he came in, had to start as a rookie, and he had been graded out as the PFF worst player that year. Up through the first 8 games, where he had, I believe it was like one of the biggest negative grades I'd ever given like any offensive lineman to that point.
Oh yeah, this is like PFF's favorite story.
Yeah, no, it's like one of their favorite ones, and he basically like turned around and started actually like working on his technique and everything, and started actually where he's still been their solid right tackle for the most part. They haven't had anyone been able to really beat him out for the after Eric Winston left the team. But the biggest one is that they've kind of had 3 easy. Well, not 3 easy, I guess. They've basically done kind of 3 quick steps. Part of it is they invested a whole lot into coaching the position. What a lot of people don't realize is that a lot of the credit for the Cardinals' success not only should go to Bruce Arians, who's being a great head coach, but he's been kind of using a lot of coaches and splitting up some of the responsibilities, where their offensive coordinator is actually Harold Goodwin. He's also the offensive line coach. So what they're doing is they're basically putting a huge part of the offense in the run game through his hands and letting Arians kind of coordinate the passing attack. Goodwin has been able to do a whole lot with his schemes, with kind of using linemen, guys who use their technique, where they're able to kind of negate a whole lot of pressure as long as they kind of keep their assignments. Last year they played the Detroit Lions, and they had a threesome of Ted Larson, Lyle Senline, and Paul Faneca, who had graded out like very, very like terrible through PFF, but they still let no pressures on the game from the interior. A lot of that was just kind of due to some of the scheming, to Palmer's manipulation, but some of it is due to really good coaching, where they have good coaches bringing players. The second thing that they've done is they've really invested and spent a whole lot of money on the offensive line. They spent a top 10 pick on Jonathan Cooper, who had a really, really bad injury for his first year, and he's never either been able to kind of live up to the expectation. He's still, even though he's healthy, he's kind of been benched for Ted Larson, who's been a lot better so far for the most part in kind of picking up a lot of the either blitzes or just with offensive line, or maybe it's just running around with Arian likes to use a lot of pulling in his schemes. They spent money on Jared Valdier, which they kind of looked into. No, Cards fans didn't think he'd be available. That Reggie McKenzie let him go, and he walked and became a free agent. And actually signed for a lot less than they were planning on paying the Brandon Albert for the Dolphins. They were trying to have to get into kind of a competition with him, so they kind of lucked into that. They also lucked into the Palmer trade, obviously, which that's kind of Steve Keim's big coup, is you can just say, hey, I got a potential MVP candidate for a 6th-round pick. So thanks, guys. So between that and they also, the surprise they had last offseason was Steve Keim has been very committed to building the O-line. They paid for Mike Iupati, like a huge contract from the Niners, just because they were ranked about 29th, 30th in the run game, and they really wanted to improve that. So they brought Iupati in. He's been kind of one of the anchors of the team this year when he's been healthy. So between all of that, they kind of had a big mishmash of kind of a little bit of lucking into with getting some talented guys, but a lot of it's more just been to investing in the offensive line, coaching the guys up. That's part of why they also took another first-round lineman this year. So that if you look at how it was under Ken Wisenhunt, they had 2 linemen that they took before the 4th round in his entire span. So you're talking about like a 4-year period where they took Levi Brown, who's kind of renowned as being like one of the most hated Phoenix sports figures, and then they took Bobby Massey in the 4th round. Didn't take any other lineman higher than that. So there's no wonder that Kevin Cobb basically like got sacked. Probably, I think he's still getting sacked right now as we're speaking. Or at least he's just kind of waking up and having night terrors of the St. Louis Rams in his nightmares. But it's been a whole big commitment to the offensive line, and that's part of where when you do invest in the O-line and you coach guys up, then you get to see a lot of benefits there. And there's been some Cards fans that have wondered if they should have spent that first-round pick in another area, since DJ Humphries he's been inactive every game, so it's kind of hard to see the first-round pick there. But the point is that they're putting into the picks, they're investing it, whether or not the picks are panning out, they're still putting a whole lot of effort into it. And I think that's kind of where you build the base of an offense, because that's where your quarterback, the protection of the run game, it all kind of flows through the offensive line. So I think that's something that should be kind of a blueprint for a lot of teams. Once you start with the quarterback and then you kind of branch off to the offensive line, and you'll start to see receivers getting open because the offensive line is protecting well. So it's been fun to see, and it's good to know that you've got a general manager who's been kind of not only good at picking up a whole lot of some of the crazy free agent steals, and we'll get into one of those in a minute, and Chris Johnson, but he's been investing a whole lot and kind of trying to build the future and protect the quarterback by building up that O-line.
Well, let's bring up Chris Johnson, and how on earth have you guys managed to make him relevant this year?
Perfectly honest answer, we kind of have no idea how he changed so dramatically. Like, we're just like, oh, Chris Johnson. And camp, when you watched him run, I was thinking because he was going to beat out Andre Ellington, which is kind of my big preseason prediction. Part of that was because, Andre Ellington, for a workhorse back, he ain't going to stay healthy that long. And, of course, he went down in the very first game versus the Saints. But also Chris Johnson is very disciplined in pass protection. And Bruce Arians is kind of strange in how he doesn't really use a run game so much as he tries to use the run game to set up the pass. So what he'll do is he'll try to see if he can get maybe about 4 yards a carry or so. And what he'll do is he'll try to use that to set up play action, set up the passing game, because then teams can't really just pin their ears back and rush Carson Palmer. So with Chris Johnson, when he came in, I'm pretty sure, obviously, this is a big credit to the coaching staff. Because when you've seen with a lot of the running backs, they've improved a whole lot as far as not only in pass protection, which that was part of why Chris Johnson was so valuable, is because he was the one of the best pass protectors on the team. So Arians could leave him back in there on third down and know that the blitz would be picked up, or that he'd be able to kind of keep Chris Johnson in there, and then he could also use the any kind of handoffs, or being able to kind of get at least maybe about 4 yards per carry out of him. So either way, it was just good coaching. Johnson, he played like he hadn't seen him in years. He changed up his style where he started hitting the hole hard.
I wanted to ask about that because, and this is kind of a thing where both of them are fighting perception. Chris Johnson, David Johnson, whereas David Johnson, huge guy, 224 pounds, I think, something like that. Not really a power back. Chris Johnson, we know about him, 2009, 2008, 2010. Not really a power back, and so a lot of people expected, because they don't know that much about David Johnson, but they know his size, that he'd be a power back, and they know a lot about Chris Johnson, that he wouldn't be a power back. But Johnson is, like you said, he's hitting the hole hard. He's taking on contact. He's acting a lot like a power back, whereas David Johnson, who I think has probably improved in this area, is definitely much more of a slasher or a scat back. Is that what is it that allowed Chris Johnson to change his running style, and is David Johnson going to do more to hit the hole harder now that he has to take on a bigger burden?
Well, yeah, I think the biggest one with Chris Johnson with how he changed up his style, a lot of it also was just somewhat due to necessity, where if you watch some of the plays where with Tennessee and the Jets, part of it I think also was the organizations, they were just bad teams and bad offenses, and so he would kind of have to put it on his back where I got to basically like get this first down, or I got to basically be the one to score the touchdown here. And I think that really hurt him, where he'd be dancing in the hole a lot. I think the injuries hurt him. I think when he came to Arizona and realized that this was a strong offense where he didn't have to worry about basically having to pick up all of the first downs, he didn't have to have the offense flow through him. I think that helped him a whole lot more of him just stick to it, do your job, and he knew he could trust the offense. So that's where a lot of times when you see offensive production, like with an Aaron Rodgers or with Tom Brady, or a lot of times they can just affect like the players on the team just because you're having good offense, and good offense produces more good offense. With David Johnson, I think there's actually going to be an improvement that you might see through the first part of the season. Chris Johnson was averaging about, just taking a look here at the averaging, but he was getting around, I want to say, about 4.2 yards a carry. Just from the running of the football, which considering Arizona was about like 3.2 last year, was like his tremendous improvement. But David Johnson was right up there along with him with 4.2 yards a carry, and they're both very similar in where they want to kind of get into a routine, get into a rhythm. If you give them about 20 carries or so a game, they'll basically be able to get you about 100 yards. They'll just kind of keep churning through, keep getting those yards. Eventually, they'll kind of break a big one. But what Johnson really has an upgrade from is he's just as good in pass protection as Chris Johnson. He's grown tremendously over there since camp. And that's a big thing for Arians, because Arians, a lot of times he wouldn't play Andre Ellington or didn't give him the starting role because Ellington wasn't able to hold up in pass protection. He wasn't able to do it. And Johnson, when he had like a whole bunch of blitzes he faced in the Rams game, he knocked them down. He was kind of showing he was a bit wise beyond his years in pass protection. And as a receiver, it's basically like having another wide receiver out there. He's got very good hands. He's a size mismatch.
Right.
And he's leading the team right now in touchdowns. So you're talking about this is a team that has Larry Fitzgerald, Michael Floyd, John Brown. They've got a big basketball tight end in Darren Fells, Andre Ellington, Chris Johnson. And it's David Johnson's got 9 touchdowns and is leading all of the other players on the team. This is the third-round rookie, so you're like, goodness. But he's been a huge, big mismatch for them where they're able to either use with real routes or just with being able to run the ball. He had the kick return touchdown. But so he's been kind of something where with Chris Johnson, you started to see him wear down. David Johnson might be even an upgrade in the run game, so long as he can hold on to the ball. So that's kind of one area the Vikings might need to see if they can kind of get a turnover here. He's had 4 fumbles this year.
Okay, well, you just mentioned Larry Fitzgerald. I kind of want to talk about, not just Larry, but this receiver core as a whole. I think a lot of people agree that, the Pittsburgh receiving core with, Brown and Bryant and all them are maybe the best receiving core in the league. And if that's the case, it certainly seems like the Arizona Cardinals receiving core may be, close to the best. I mean, maybe Michael Floyd isn't panning out like a lot of people wanted him to, but Larry Fitzgerald's very good. Michael Floyd is still actually pretty good. And then you've got John Brown and Jerron Brown. And then he also mentioned, of course, you've got tight end Darren Fells, and you've got, David Johnson, who might even be a better receiver than a running back. You've got all of these receiving options. You've got such a great receiving core. So first, did you maybe you lucked into this receiving core? Has it been a good investment? Is it good scouting? Like, what is it that got you this receiving core? B, is this a big part of the reason Carson Palmer is very effective this year? And C, what has made Larry Fitzgerald suddenly so effective this year?
All right, got a lot of stuff to cover here. All right, here we go. So with the Cardinals, a lot of the credit can just kind of go to Bruce Arians. He's basically like the QB, he's considered a QB guru, but I think he's in actuality even more of like a wide receiver guru and like a wide receiver god as far as it comes to developing wide receivers. If you look at his track record from guys from Pittsburgh, they had like Antonio Brown, but they found Mike Wallace in the 3rd round. They had Emmanuel Sanders. He was one of the guys who ended up working with Anton Randall, I believe. He was a wide receivers coach before he was a quarterbacks coach, and he's just a guy who, in his schemes, he understands where a lot of it runs off of deep passing, good route runners, and so he's really kind of been able to find and see their guy. It's been kind of a very, very set little profile where it's 5'10" wide receiver, runs about like at least a 4.4 or under. Faster is better. Usually the faster receivers do better in his scheme because he likes to take so many shots, and they try to work on separation off of running there. But so basically they've kind of had a plug and play thing. Like J.J. Nelson, Michael Floyd, after he went down with an injury, was out for the game. They played the Bengals, and J.J. Nelson kind of took up in the starting spot with John Brown injured. He goes off for 142 yards on the Bengals with a touchdown. And you're just like, okay, who's this fifth-round pick out of? Was this UAB? they don't even have a football program, do they, anymore now? So it's been something where Arians, and just kind of a credit to their scouting, their talents, like John Brown, they had a third-round pick on him that they got, and there's like no other team had like that high of a grade on him. And he looks like he's going to be like a big threat for years to come. So it's just something where that's part of the talent level and the scouting that kind of goes to the team and the organization, but also just kind of to their scheme as well. Where they just got so many weapons where Fitzgerald, Floyd, they can just kind of spread you out. Even when they were down receivers in the Seattle game, Jerron Brown made like 3 or 4 like really, really clutch catches down the sideline. So it's something where that's been kind of the deepest part of their team has been the wide receivers. So when guys are going down, they have other players who are able to step up, and so that's part of why Carson Palmer's been able to kind of deliver. That's why they've been able to kind of get back in a lot of games, because they can quick strike back in with like it's nothing. The Browns game, they were down by 2 touchdowns or so. And they're going to the half, they got a touchdown at the half, and they ended up winning by double digits on the road. So it's like this is a quick strike offense with the wide receivers. They're never truly out of a game as long as they're there. So that's part of why the success is Carson Palmer can also be attributed to the wide receivers, but he's also kind of making them as well. As for Fitzgerald, he's been kind of a really interesting case. I mean, this is a Hall of Fame player that you're talking about. Like people still can remember his Super Bowl run with Kurt Warner, just like 150 yards, 3 touchdowns in a game. And now you're telling Cardinals fans, hey, so we're taking Larry Fitzgerald and we're going to make him a blocking possession receiver. And you're just like, what? Like, this makes no sense. Excuse me, Bruce Arians, can we have Wisenhunt back, please? Can we? No. But he turned him into more of the Hines Ward role. And once Fitzgerald kind of accepted that role, he's been very, very dominant because based on how defensive scheme go, a lot of times see that there's linebackers and safeties that are lined up on Larry Fitzgerald. And so part of it is that he's been able to not only be a huge contributor in the running game, but he's been able to just take advantage of those mismatches. And he's 32 years old and on pace for his best season that he's ever had as a pro. Probably going to get somewhere around like 1,400 yards, probably about 8 touchdowns or so. And it's something where he just kind of, Arians' philosophy was that older receivers, if they want to stay good, have to kind of move into that possession role. He's really embraced it and become more of the team player, and then not really worried as much about the targets or catches, and those have still continued to follow. He's been a big force, and that's kind of a huge mismatch that the Cardinals have been able to take advantage of. So it's been kind of fun to see with it, but that's part of why he's so effective this year. Otherwise, is because he's healthy. Last year, people didn't know, but he kind of had to battle through a hamstring injury all last season, as well as having to play under the likes of Drew Stanton and Ryan Lindley, who. It kind of is the name of he who must not be named for a lot of Arizona fans as far as quarterbacks go. But that's part of why he's been really effective this year, is that the Cardinals are spreading teams out, taking advantage of it, and he's just getting on the bright side of a lot of those mismatches.
Okay, and so that brings up an interesting question because you talk about Larry Fitzgerald last year wasn't as effective. He was injured for a big portion of last year, and people didn't know about it. There's a lot of talk about potentially trading Larry Fitzgerald. And I know his contract kind of makes it very, very difficult to do that. Also a lot of talk for the Vikings trading Adrian Peterson. And some fans wanted to make the connection between, bringing Larry Fitzgerald back to Minnesota where he's from, sending Adrian Peterson over to Arizona where they needed a running back. And obviously that trade didn't end up happening. Adrian Peterson's playing well for the Vikings. Larry Fitzgerald is playing really well for the Cardinals. A lot of fans still want to trade Adrian Peterson at the end of this year because, hey, he's 31. The cliff is going to happen sooner rather than later, and he's playing well, but the offense isn't really, sort of gelling. That's not really happening with Larry, but it is still a question that a lot of people may want to ask at the end of the year. Hey, he's coming off of a career year, but, what does it make sense to trade him at the end of the year, perhaps after you get your ring?
Yeah, I think with Fitzgerald, as far as trading line, he's a huge, like, grew up as a Vikings ball boy. It's always personal whenever he ends up playing the Vikings, just because it's like his second home. He lives in Minnesota in the off season. As far as Larry goes, he's basically he signed a 2-year contract. He's getting paid around $11 million. Most people looked at his numbers and were like, yeah, you're overpaying Larry Fitzgerald. It's a terrible decision. And now he's gone into the season. You're like, oh, you're actually kind of getting your value and worth out of him for that. So it shows sometimes a situation you just kind of, with guys who are that talented, like, the talent comes out. But he's under contract until, I believe it's after next season. They'll have to decide if they want to re-up him again. I don't think that they would trade Fitzgerald as much because they want him to retire a Cardinal. They're basically trying to get a lifetime player for him, trying to not like what happened with Jerry Rice and other receivers with him. So we'll see when his skills start diminishing. Right now, with how Arians is using him, he could probably play, if he avoids a major injury, for about 3 to 4 more years. We'll see what will happen as far as contract goes with his numbers. But so far, I think you can probably look forward to Fitzgerald and Cardinal red, at least for the foreseeable future. The only wide receiver that might be parting with the Cardinals, if some have wondered, is Michael Floyd. He hasn't been he's been a decent fit in Arians' offense, but he's more been kind of all right, so we need either pass interference flag deep or just a guy to go up and make like a circus catch and a tight coverage, bring it down. That's been kind of his role this year, where they haven't really needed to use Michael Floyd. They haven't had to target him a lot. He's the only player I could see, at least out of those wide receivers, that they might be considerably, at least for trading if they could. There were some rumors in the offseason that they might have been trying to. But they've got him under contract at least through 2016. They did exercise his option. So it looks very likely that you're going to see the same Cardinals receiving core, at least for the next this year and the next year for sure. Which means that the Cardinals have a very good chance, at least, of if they don't make it anywhere this year, and this is a team that does have Super Bowl aspirations, they might be able to try to come back next year and see if they can try to give another shot at it if they do end up falling short to a team like Carolina or Green Bay, or if you guys end up being able to kind of come back healthy and go on a big run.
It's nice of you to include us in that. I just want to say it's very nice and diplomatic of you.
Generous.
And in fact, if you guys would like, we have a wide receiver who we're already overpaying, and we might be able to talk after the show and see if we can negotiate something.
Perfect fit for the Arians offense.
I think his 0 catches a game would really help you guys quite a bit.
Oh, goodness. Well, that actually, I think, does remind me of something with Cordero Patterson. It does remind me, though, that is something that the Cardinals might need to look out for. They gave up a huge kick return to Tavon Austin in the Rams game. They got called back on a holding call. So if you're looking to try to produce offense on that's one area that the Arizona is kind of, at a couple times they've gotten lucky as far as for guys not breaking all the way through. So that'll be interesting, though. So
yeah, apparently that's all Patterson is doing for us right now. So he's at least contributing in his small, high-stepping way.
Yep. No, with the I saw a lot of fans were kind of upset about that, but it could be worse. I mean, with Justin Gilbert right now, I mean, talking about a guy who's not only like the fourth corner on his own team, but he's not even getting the chance to return kicks anymore. So that's unfortunate.
Well, with the Patterson thing, like, it'd be different. Like, I can't actually be upset about the whole celebration thing because he at least held on to the ball the entire time. Like, you see those, like, terrible replays where the guy drops it at, like, the one going in. Like, if he did that, then okay, off with his head, but high stepping, okay, whatever. But at least he's carrying it through, as far as the NFL is concerned, completing it to the end zone and not fumbling it or dropping it.
Yeah, he didn't pull a Deshaun Jackson. That's
true.
Or
Eddie Lacy nearly did it this year. Like, he dropped it like 3 inches into the end zone. Like, yeah. Just complete that, and then we're fine. So here's my question. What's the key to stopping the Cardinals from putting up 40 points on us?
Well, I can't guarantee that they won't just because their offense is that good where it could go off. But the biggest one, obviously, is you got to realize this is the Cardinals team that a lot of people doubted them because they've been inconsistent. And you got to realize, if this is a team that lost to Nick Foles and the Rams at home and also lost to Landry Jones at quarterback, you're like, ooh, I don't know exactly what to make of them. And for a lot of it, sometimes it's the Cardinals beating themselves and the other teams who played them, they've taken advantage of it. That's been in both their losses. They've had a bigger turnover margin as far as for if they turn the ball over on offense, and the other teams can take advantage and put up points, and their offense kind of has to play from behind. You might see Arians, if he's not able to get effectively running the ball, that was something people would complain about, where versus the Rams, they're averaging about 5 yards a carry with Chris Johnson, and he abandoned the run game and just kind of went back to passing against a really good secondary. And the other one also with Palmer is he's been very good at getting pressure, but if you hit him enough, and it's kind of you have to keep going after him, keep kind of either blitzing or getting pressure with 4 guys, That's been the biggest where they've struggled as far as for completing the game or winning. And then the last one, obviously, honestly, is the red zone. The red zone offense for the Cardinals hasn't been nearly as effective as it could have been. They've had times where they're in the red zone 4 to 5 times in the first half, and they came away with 10 points. The team kind of usually is more of a second half team. They'll make some adjustments. They'll get some big plays that'll fire it up. But if you can kind of keep the Cardinals in the red zone where you can hold them back, usually it's on third down. Is the key down for them third down in the red zone. There's either games where they'll complete like 11 out of 12 on third down. There's some games where they'll complete maybe like 2 out of 8. And that's kind of the biggest key. So if you want to try to avoid the Cardinals putting up the points, you have to basically put them on the defensive, get a lead up front. And then you have to make sure that in the second half when they adjust and start taking more of those deep shots, you really have to adjust your offense as well and start trying to make sure you can hit Palmer more. So I think honestly with this game, it's something where I don't think that don't think it's going to be nearly as much of a blowout as a lot of Vikings fans are expecting. Like they're seeing the number one offense coming in at home, short week. But honestly, the Cardinals a lot of times have come into some of these games and they haven't had the right focus. It's been less of a problem in the second half, but I do think that there is a chance where they could go in. If they have a turnover early, if David Johnson fumbles, if the Vikings can take advantage of it. I think there might be a chance, at least as far as for the Vikings, where they could actually put some points up on the board, put some pressure on Arizona. But right now, this is a Cardinals team that I do think is hitting its stride. They're feeling very confident. This is a team where they basically gave up back-to-back fumbles taken into the end zone or a touchdown scored or 14 points. And they came back right down the field. They're very, very confident in Palmer and their passing attack. It's going to be really rough, I think, to see the Vikings be able to pull out a win because it's on the road. But I do think that if they do take advantage of Arizona's mistakes, and they will have some mistakes, then I think that they've got a shot to be able to keep it a close game going into the fourth quarter.
In 5 of the 12 games the Cardinals played, they've scored fewer than 28 points. One of those is relevant because it was a 27-3 win against the Rams. But you had some close games. Baltimore Ravens 26-18. St. Louis Rams lost 22-24. San Francisco 49ers, I don't know what happened in that game. And I watched it.
I know what happened with that game. They thought they were going to win in that game because they won 47-7 the first game and almost put up a 50-burger on them. They're like, oh, we're going up against Blaine Gabbert. It's not going to happen. Same thing happened. They're like, oh, hey guys, Michael Vick is out. We've held the Steelers to negative offensive yards in the first half. So Landry Jones is coming in. We got nothing. So the defense just relaxed. So I think that's part of the key of the team is that they learned a lot from their mistakes earlier, where the coach could just kind of kick them and basically be like, hey, you got to focus on this. And that's where I don't see them having kind of a trap game versus the Vikings, because they see them at 8-4. They know it's an important game. They're trying for the number 2 seed, and I don't think it's going to be that type of a game. But I also don't think that it's going to be a total blowout unless you start seeing Vikings turnovers on offense. The Cardinals have been able to win games with negative turnover margins. But that's kind of something where if they do start forcing turnovers, then the Vikings better watch out, because that's one fast-paced offense that wants to punish you right away after you get that turnover.
Well, what's forgotten is that this is a Thursday night football game and that anything can happen. The bad team on paper can easily just wipe the floor with the good team, and the good team's just sitting there just shaking their head going, what just happened? But the flip side of that, as was pointed out on Twitter, is that the Vikings in prime time, everyone in the country watching us games, the record is atrocious. I'm reminded
the last 16 games on the road in prime time, 1-15.
I'm reminded of the 2009 season where we played, I believe it was a Sunday night football game against the Cardinals, and this was a very good Vikings team, and we got smoked. It was
hammered,
ugly. Injuries.
Yep, I remember that game. Actually, I actually know why you got smoked in that one too. I'm trying to remember who your right tackle was in 2009. See if I can look that up at least for that one. But the biggest reason why was there was actually the Cardinals film. They discovered a tell in one of the Vikings linemen, where if they were set in a certain way, they were going to pass, and they set another way, they were going to run. And so they knew exactly what the Vikings offense was going to do the whole game. So they just would blitz Brett Favre when he needed to. And I just remember that being something that they came out with after the season ended, because it was just some simple film work back then where it's like, yeah, that's something as simple as that sometimes can change the entire dexterity of a game.
Yeah, that was Phil Lodeholt's rookie year, so not a huge surprise, although a couple of people have emailed me and told me they think Brandon Fusco has a very similar tell. If they can find out, hopefully the Vikings can find out, because they are very committed to self-scouting. We shall see on Thursday, I suppose. Yeah. Now I think, unless we want to get some more special teams notes out of the way, now I think we can get to sort of the mailbag, which I think you can actually be a huge contributor for if you're still up for it, Blake.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, let's start off with a message from Iowa Josh, who asks, after last week's embarrassment, will Norv run more short routes other than the one crossing route and running back screens? And to you, do you think that this would be effective against the Cardinals, Blake?
I think that if they run short routes, that's part of where Arizona, a lot of their secondary is built around, is not giving up the big play. So that's part of where they try to see if they can let you have the short route and kind of keep it, maybe run like a little bit, but they want to try to really contain you when you have to drop back to pass on third down. If they run a couple of running back screens, like look at the Saints game, you look at the game the Cardinals had against the Bengals where Gio Bernard went off for like 140 yards in receiving. I think that there's a lot of some of those short routes they can take advantage of Arizona's slower linebackers, or if they get more upfield. That would be a huge plus where I think you could get some chunk yards. The Cardinals sometimes, I've noticed this when I watched the Vikings game against the Seahawks last week, was missed tackles were a huge factor. Especially just where you'd have plays where guys would be down and they just go it up and they'd be able to run off for about like 40 yards or so. Arizona sometimes can have the same thing too, where they'll go for the ball. So if Arizona can kind of lock down and get those tackles, I think it's fine. If they don't and they kind of aren't focused and they miss, then you could start seeing some huge gains off of plays that weren't supposed to be that way with broken plays. So I hope that for the Vikings' sake, it's like I want to say I hope they'll run more short plays. For the Cardinals' sake, I hope that they just line back and try to throw it deep, just because that'll help their pass rush and their ball hawking secondary.
Yeah, in terms of whether or not Norv is going to do it, I've been a little bit surprised with the way the passing game has evolved over the course of the season, because it seems to evolve in a way that's actually less beneficial for Teddy. I remember last year the passing game evolved a little bit and moved to a shorter passing game. We saw more crossing routes at the end of the year last year. We saw, a couple more screens. Some of them were tight end screens that people weren't super hot on. But we saw a couple more screens late in the season last year. This year, I think we saw a lot of crossing routes sort of early in the season. Not that much against San Francisco, but week 2, week 3, week 4, we saw a lot of those. We saw a couple of really nice-looking running back screens, actually, sort of in the early season and in the middle of the season. We haven't seen those recently as we hit sort of this final quarter of the season, and it's kind of like sort of anti-adaptation. Hopefully, we'll move out of it. We'll move towards things that take advantage of some of the weaknesses that we see with the Cardinals. Blake already mentioned that running back screens could be pretty effective. Talked about how there's sometimes the potential for a lot of missed tackles, and certainly crossing routes could take advantage of the linebacker core. I don't know that we'll do it. The Vikings saw a lot of opportunity to take 5-yard routes or crossing routes against the Seahawks last week or this week, Sunday, and didn't take advantage of those. So we'll see if Turner does it. We'll see if he gets into a headspace and thinks that the Vikings should only take deep shots, which is I think is what's happening in these games where the Vikings get blown out. Is that when they don't have the lead early, then they start over compensating by trying to get a lot of these deep shots. So I don't think we'll see a lot of short routes, but hopefully we will.
Yeah, I think that's where Arians had that tendency too from 2013. A lot of fans would kind of complain where they'd get down early and then they would start to learn a new defense and they would just kind of abandon the run game. And I think with Adrian Peterson, if you look at like the number of carries he gets, like it's not a causation for the most part as far as for when he gets like I think it's that 17 carries or more number that I've heard from some Vikings fans as far as for him getting carries. But more carries he gets if they don't abandon the run game, they're able to kind of at least be effective enough on the ground. That'll kind of be able to help set up the passing game where Arizona won't be able to just kind of blow back and blitz all the time. They'll be able to take advantage of that. So I think that's kind of the big keys of the game is going to be just kind of maybe a little bit more dink and dunk down the field, keep a heavy ground game, try to get some creativity as far as for trying to get Arizona out of place there. And then I think that you'll be able to try to see if you can maybe take a shot or two downfield and take advantage of Justin Bethel's use, or see if you can find a big mismatch with Kyle Rudolph and someone like Matthew, or maybe it's on a linebacker like Minter.
Well, let's move on to the next question, which is from Justin Rubin, who asks, what type of skill position archetypes do we need to maximize Teddy's skill set?
That's a pretty good question. I think the first thing that the Vikings need to prioritize, whether it's by players getting healthy, free agency, or the draft, actually has less to do with skill positions, more has to do with the offensive line. And their sort of the archetype is good. But from there, if you wanted to talk about like receivers, I think that the Vikings need two things from receivers, either or actually. They don't have to be the same, although it would be nice. They could either get a guy who wins contested catches. I think the Vikings are losing a lot of downfield opportunities in situations where the ball could be close to a defensive back by having receivers who just don't win contested catch situations. Sort of a big body possession type receiver, maybe Michael Floyd. Who we actually, when Blake, when you described Larry Fitzgerald's role, I was like, isn't that Michael Floyd's role?
Yeah, that's what you'd think, but no. Michael Floyd has basically been their run down the field, jump up, made the contested catch guy. In fact, all of their wide receivers for the Cardinals, I think this is kind of something where people could take a little leaf out of Arian's book. If you look at his guys, like even with T.Y. Hilton, Antonio Brown, those guys, they all make contested catches to the point where you've got like little 5'10", 100, maybe like 50-pound J.J. Nelson's running up, and he's just like making contested hands catches against like quarterbacks taller and bigger than him. So it's just kind of crazy when you look at that with how much a contested catch guy can really help bail your quarterback out. Yeah,
for sure. And then I think the second kind is actually the other end of the T.Y. Hilton, Antonio Brown spectrum is, while Hilton and Brown definitely both win contested catches, I think that's a kind of a key attribute for receivers. I think that you could get another guy like Diggs, like Hilton, like Brown, that works very effectively in timing-oriented offenses. Because I think for all of Mike Wallace's attributes, his speed, his ability to sort of get downfield, and his ability to create space at times with the way that he moves, he's not very good in terms of a timing or route system. And I think that's the problem that you have with Cordell Patterson. To some extent, that's the problem that you have with Charles Johnson. And I think that somebody who is where he is supposed to be, which sounds like you're not asking for a lot. It actually turns out you're asking for a ton. But that is kind of what the Vikings need: somebody who works within a timing offense and can be where they need to be and relatively open too. So those are the two kinds of skill positions I would target at receiver. At tight end, I think that just a healthy version of Kyle Rudolph would be fine. And at running back, I mean, I don't think that the running back position matters all that much going forward, because any running back you acquire from here on out is going to be familiar with a variety of running positions, as opposed to the problem that the Vikings theoretically have with Adrian Peterson, which which we already talked about in sort of the last show, which is going to be recorded after this show. Is that they're going to be familiar with running from shotgun, from pistol, and from the eye, whereas the theoretical problem that the Vikings have with Adrian Peterson is that he's only good at running out of the eye. Any new acquisition that you make at running back is going to solve that problem. So that's not something that I would worry about targeting in terms of finding a skilled player.
All right, let's go to the final question, which is from Jackson Smith, who asks, how much are we going to lose by? So we'll just transition into a score prediction. We ask all of our guests to put up a score prediction, and then we laugh at them unmercilessly when it turns out that it's way more in their favor than it probably should be. So, what do you think for a score prediction for Thursday night's game, Blake?
I think the biggest key matchup that I see here is, I think Arif, you pointed this out earlier in the week, is, the Vikings are down a couple of safeties. It won't be a problem as long as the Cardinals don't throw deep. And Carson Palmer's got averaging about 9.2 yards per attempt. That leads the league as far as for deep passing. And they've got 4-2 guys like J.J. Nelson. They've got Larry Fitzgerald who still has it. He actually had a wide open 60-yard touchdown that Palmer overthrew him on. Just earlier in the year. He's fast. Brown is always a threat. He could score on any play. David Johnson, you're talking about a man who's about 225, 6'1", and he runs about a 4.45 40, as far as where he's basically like another receiver threat at all times. I just don't know if with the Vikings, with how their injuries are at safety, and then with a great playmaker like Barr out in the run game, and even with Linval Joseph, their the DT out, I think those are some real key injuries. Hopefully Harrison Smith will be able to play for you guys. I think having that kind of a playmaker in the secondary, you might be able to see some benefit there. But I think that Arizona's probably going to end up having some struggles maybe in the first half. I think in the second half they'll be able to put it away. So right now I've got them about 27-14. I've got a touchdown, I think, for kick return, or perhaps a big play to Stephon Diggs, I think, is another possibility for the Vikings to be able to put up some points on the board. But I do think this is mostly going to be a Cardinals game. It might be a little bit closer throughout the game with that, but I think it's going to probably end up with about that final score. It is a Thursday night game after all, though. We'll see what happens.
It would be interesting if we have any safeties come out and play for us. We didn't really have anybody left after the Seattle game.
Yeah, no, we'll see. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we have one of the safeties who's starting be one of the safeties who is not on the roster on Monday night. So it'll be fun to see what happens. As for my score prediction, I think that there is a good chance that the Vikings could win, and I think that there's a good chance that they can keep it close, but I think that the best chance is for a Cardinals blowout. Not because, I'm as caught up in recency bias as most of Vikings Twitter, which I think that, you've got the Green Bay blowout and you've got the Seattle blowout in mind with a mediocre team that we beat in the middle. It's more just these injuries are bothering me, and the Cardinals are the best or the second best team in the NFC. I think the best. Because of that, I think that it's probably going to be a blowout just because of the short week, because it's on the road, because of the injuries. And so I'm going to say the Cardinals are going to put up a nice round number, 30 points. And the Vikings are going to respond with 17, so 30-17.
I'm going to go a little bit different route. I think we are discounting how wacky Thursday nights can be.
That I'd agree with. That's the big thing that's kind of concerning me going into this one.
And I think the Vikings are going to put up 21, and I think the Cardinals are going to put up 24. I think that it's going to be one of those stupid games where Vegas is going to be pissed because the Cardinals don't cover. And I think the Vikings Cardinals game is opening at like either a 7 or an 8 point margin, and
yeah, I think everybody was kind of surprised at the line. I think it opened at 7 points and it's moved to 7.5 for most of Vegas. So
yeah.
I mean, with a home field advantage, I mean that's only 4.5 points on a neutral field. So I think a lot of people are surprised by the way the line opened.
Yeah, I think it's going to be 21-24. I think the Vikes are going to come up just short, and it'll be interesting. We don't get a chance to see Bruce Arians every year, and there's certainly been a lot of talk about how good of a coach he is. So it'll be interesting to sit and watch. The Cardinals don't get a lot of national games, like not a lot of Sunday night, not a lot of Monday night. So it's really an opportunity to sit down and watch one of the rising stars in the NFC and see if we can hang with them and see how bad the injury bug is going to bite us.
Yeah, well, as a Cardinals fan perspective, like we'd circled this game about a month ago or so on our calendar. It's just like this might be one of the key games for determining the number 2 seed, either for the Cardinals, for the Vikings, or even just for the Packers too. So there's a whole lot to play for in this game for a Thursday night football game. So I think that the Vikings are going to come out pretty intense. I think the Cardinals are going to want to come out pretty intense. It's going to be really interesting to see how the Thursday night takes advantage of. As far as national games go, the biggest changes where we used to, as Cards fans, dread the national games because we would know we'd have Kurt Warner, Larry Fitzgerald, Anquan Bolden, this great offense. We'd go into the 49ers on a Monday night game, and we'd get blown out. It was just one of those parts where
we don't know what that's like at all in any respect.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
not even the San Francisco part. Not even no.
Yeah, no, yeah. That was a rough game, but no, the Cardinals. It seems like they've gotten over that from this last year. They've won almost all of their national games under Arians. That they've had Carson Palmer in as a starter. So part of it is they've gotten this is, I think, their 5th national game. They have just got cleared for the Eagles game next week, which will be the desert team in the snow. So that'll be kind of fun to see if they actually can come out or do anything in the snow. In the past, they've had big blowouts in cold weather as the team's tradition. But this is a different team now. So I think the Cardinals have been able to put the ghosts of their Sunday night football and their Monday night football or Thursday night football past behind them. I think they will come out with a victory over here, but I'm looking for the Vikings to come out, and they'll come out fighting because there's a lot to play for in this game.
Well, if you would like to follow Blake, you can do so at Blake Murphy7 on Twitter. If you would like to follow Arif, you can do so at ArifHassanNFL. I do the Norse Code podcast Twitter account, which is Norse Code DN. You can also follow me at Big Mono. And Dusty, whose lazy ass is not on the show this episode, is at Dusty O'Connell. He's on assignment. I just like saying he's on assignment. He's really just working and being a lazy bastard.
Make it sound like he's like scoping outside the Vikings locker room or something, trying for hints or something, but nah.
No, he's just working. He's just collecting tips. Good for him. But that will be it for this episode. Again, look for Dusty and Arif's recap of the Arizona game shortly after it completes on late Thursday night. We'll be posting that most likely on Friday morning. But for Arif, for Dusty, for Blake, my name is James. Thank you so much for listening. And our formula is this: keep Teddy alive. And we'll see you on Thursday night, Friday morning.
Norse Code is the official podcast of the Daily Norseman SB Nation blog and is produced with cooperation from Pompous Jerk Productions. Pompous Jerk Productions. Attitude with attitude. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of their contributors and do not reflect official positions of the Minnesota Vikings, SB Nation, the Daily Norseman staff, or PJP. No information in this podcast should be construed as gambling advice. Please obey all local gaming laws.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.